Minister came to me in 2009 and said, why can't you tell us where we can mine and where we can't mine? Instead of, always battling. I said, great idea. Let's do an analysis of where the coal fields are and let's figure out what the areas that can be mined and can't be mined. So the chairman of Coal India said, sir, let's do this go, no-go analysis. Okay? The word go, no-go came from the chairman of Coal India. The idea was, let's look at the coal, let's look at the forests, let's look at our biodiversity, let's look at our tribal population, and figure out which are the areas which are going to be difficult and which are the areas that can be mined. So we did this exercise for the 9 major coal fields in the country: Odisha, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh. And it turned out that 70% of the coal reserves are in areas which were classified as go areas. The forest is not very rich, there are no local communities, water sources are not close by, so the ecological impact is not as negative as you expected. And 30% of the area is a no-go area. They are either rich forests, or you have large populations who have to be resettled, or you have water sources, the sources of rivers and so on and so forth. So it was a 70-30. Let's say a similar exercise was done for iron ore, but the big thing was for coal. There was a huge food furor, and nobody was willing to accept the fact that there are areas in India which you will have to keep as it is, but use the other areas where the resources are available. That's a long story, you're aware of it. There was a big controversy, and today, at the end of 5 years or 6 years of the debate, the government has now classified 95% as go areas and 5% as no-go areas. So, our mind, ultimately it's a mindset. And our mindset is, if there is a bauxite there, we must mine it. If there is a coal mine there, we must mine it. And very often, I think the choices on the ground do not allow for such simplistic interventions, for the reason that you have enumerated. There are large populations, there are large townships, and our track record in resettlement and rehabilitation is very poor. So at least if our track record in R&R is very good, people would gladly part with their land. But they are not willing to part with their land because our track record, and this track record, by the way, is not just of the private sector, the track record of the public sector, the track record of the government. We are still relocating people who were dislocated from the Bhakra Nangal Dam. They are still being resettled and rehabilitated. So, the insensitivity that governs many of these choices creates a situation of conflict. And that is why today POSCO is unable to acquire the land required for its steel plant. 10 years have passed by. 1 village out of 7 is standing guard, so to speak. It does not want its land to be acquired. Vedanta in Niyamgiri, the tribals of Niyamgiri don't want the bauxite to be mined. So, Arun, the point I'm making is that these are political questions. These are not economic or technocratic or corporate questions. Should the voices of those tribals be heard? Should the voices of that one village which is holding out be heard? Of course it should be heard. And if it means taking a choice in their favor, in my view, democracy does not always mean listening to the majority. Democracy also means listening to small groups who often do not have representation in the political system.
On the same theme, I'm not a coal expert, but I am given to understand that one of the richest seams of coal subsists below Singhbhum. Is a town in Bengal. Now nobody says, let us demolish this town and let's take this coal out. But when it comes to a tribal community in Jharkhand, you're only too happy and go and exploit that mineral. So this is actually a function of power. Since the community that would have to be displaced in Singhbhum is vocal and powerful and organized, you do not even move the idea of taking that coal out. But because these are a vulnerable group of tribal people who are generally disempowered, you think, let's go and take it. So this is actually a question not so much of sensitivity, but of power. Now, how will democracy work? Like you said, you have to protect the rights of minorities. But is the minority actually in a position to protect itself? And who will defend the minority if the government itself says is not able to enforce its own laws?
No, I mean, look, these are judgments that you make. There were voices in my own government who told me that I'm stopping 4,000 Dongaria cones from becoming software engineers. That, you know, if this bauxite is mined, you will have investment, you'll have schools, you'll have colleges, you'll have hospitals, and each of these Dongaria cones who are not wearing anything today will become a software engineer 10 years from now. I mean, there were people who were giving me this argument. So, you know, this is a very attractive argument because the number of people who are affected are very small. And the question that you ask is, how long can these people hold us back? Now, then, it's a very slippery slope, Arun, from there. It's a very slippery slope from there to a majoritarian view which says, I'm going to do whatever it can to get 10% growth. If it means forcible acquisition of land, if it means forcible development of coal reserves in areas where people don't want those reserves to be developed and they want to retain their livelihoods. So that dividing line is very, very, very thin. And I think every government, whichever the government, whether it's at the central level or at the state level, it is always a one step forward, two step backward, no matter which the government is. Every government faces these types of challenges. And sometimes these challenges come from politically influential people, like you mentioned in the case of Singhbhum. And in some cases, the challenge comes from people who are able to mobilize themselves because their livelihoods are being lost. So, you know, it's a matter that has to be decided ultimately, in my view. That's why I said the trade-off, there are conflicts, there are contradictions, there are choices. How do you make it? There's no textbook solution. It has to be made as part of a democratic process. It has to be made as part of a legislative process because that's the only system that we have.
We have 2-3 minutes left. So
And Rahul Bajaj has not yet asked a question.
you don't know.
I know the answers I will get and I won't like them.
There is one question, Jairam, which has not been covered in your answer so far. Is it viable for India to rely on human capital in order to preserve the environment?
Why do we rely on it?
No, why don't we just rely on human capital
Meaning?
instead of physical resources, just human capital?
No, but you need the physical resources. Is it the questioner's contention that you can afford to do without rivers, you can afford to do without mountains, you can afford to do without biodiversity, you can afford to do without forests? You need these physical resources because these physical resources are fulfilling, may I say, not just an ecological function, but they're also fulfilling an economic function. So if you don't have these physical reserves, if you just completely obliterate all your physical reserves, I mean, I can't think of any country in the world which has developed only on human resources. I think the Soviet Union tried that. And the worst examples of environmental disaster are to be found in the erstwhile Soviet Union. Because they said, you know, environment doesn't matter. So the great Aral Sea, you know, in Central Asia, has just become completely vanished into thin air.
Well, thank you, Jairam. This is all we have time for right now. It's a very important subject for India's growth and development, not only India's, for the entire world's growth and development. But this has to be managed, as you said, not only using technology, but also using politics to ensure that the concerns of the vulnerable sections of society are also protected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ramesh, for sharing your thoughts with us, and thank you, Mr. T.K. Arun, for conducting this session. May I invite on stage Mr. Feroz Vanderwala to please present mementos of our appreciation to our esteemed speakers of the session. We'd like to thank Mr. Jairam Ramesh. And our sincere thanks to Mr. T.K. Arun. Thank you, Mr. Vanderwala, for joining us on stage to present the mementos. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, we will take the lunch